Now, let's see what Professor Sakhaee says about interactive classes and what he considers to be the most effective approaches for students to learn from teachers.
We are trying to develop e-learning materials that encourage our teaching staff to have interactive classes and help them to be able to teach about their specialization in English. So what kind of support do you think is necessary to help them improve their teaching skills in English?
Sure. Mainly, I think what is important in the materials which can be provided for teachers is more important than the grammatical and like the way of speak words is how to use the language, the use of language mainly, and how it's presented, how it's communicated, which includes the delivery, for instance, of language, and also any cultural differences in the way it's expressed. For instance, if there are mainly a lot of international students, then they will have some cultural differences in the way they perceive the language. So translating from Japanese to English just directly does not always work. So that's one aspect, and a lot of things to do with the attitude of the teachers also makes a difference. So basically, the way of speaking and the way of communication and how it's communicated is very important. And usually it's a well-known fact that it's not what you say but how you say it. Yes. And that becomes a very important aspect of presenting in English or any other language, I think.
It's true. Non-verbal.
Non-verbal communication, yes. So that non-verbal communication supplements that other aspects.
But there are students from all parts of the world, but I understand it's important how the language is delivered. But how can we be careful, or what's your advice for us to be appropriately delivering the language?
I think the main approach of communication is the use of autonomous supportive language, which allows the student to make choices, and language which can motivate and inspire. Now this becomes tricky because what kind of language does inspire? Then that's important. And a lot of times just asking rhetorical questions, for instance, or questions which make students think about what is being presented, allows the student to take time to absorb and also at the same time think about what is being presented, helping them to remember much better. So I think mainly a language which induces thought and it is very is effective. And so this could mean like the use of how, when, why, and things like that. Instead of presenting facts, just concrete facts, or telling a story, for instance. Telling a story also helps a lot, or something that the students can relate to in their own lives, and use of applications. These all help. Another important aspect is relatedness, how the students relate to the teachers. Do they do assignments because they're afraid that they might get in trouble, for instance, or do they do it because they enjoy it, because they are given a choice, and the assignment is interesting, for instance, so they like to do that. I mean, that affects how much they learn, for instance, during the course. So the student and teacher relationship is also very important in learning, and the closer this relationship, and the lesser the gap between the hierarchies, and the more comfortable the students are with their teachers, and really does make a difference in their learning. Yes, and also how much the student feels they're capable of doing what they're doing. For instance, if a teacher presents a lot of complicated materials and equations, and the student gets very confused, especially early on in their course, also affects their confidence and thus their learning. So it's all these different kind of factors affect the, more so than the use of what words themselves, but it's how this complete system, let's say, works, considering all the different aspects of learning, teaching and learning.
So what can be done to create an interactive class in the sciences then?
Interactivity, again, is a very important aspect of learning, and that could include discussions. So discussion is one aspect of interactivity. Another is the materials being presented. So presenting interesting materials full of imagery, for instance.
Oh, I see, the visual.
Visual. So, basically using the five senses somehow to communicate, because we have five senses. We don't just hear things. We see things. We feel things. So it's a lot of times I use a lot of graphics in my presentations, because we are very generally, most people like to see images, and
seeing is believing.
Seeing is believing, and a picture speaks 1,000 words. It's a common known fact. And so instead of a lot of text and equations, at least to warm the students up, it's nice to present something, and that will induce interactivity and interest also.
I see. Sounds like your class is really interesting.
Interacting with students basically involves a two-way conversation. So it's not just about the teacher presenting things and students just sitting and listening and taking notes, but it's about saying something as a teacher and asking questions, students asking questions, and also giving a chance for students to absorb the knowledge. So, and as I mentioned before, discussions between students and student teachers, this is also important. And this can be supplemented by questions, just presenting some questions to the students for them to think about, and giving them time to do that, which requires teachers' patience also.
Yes.
Generally, as lecturers and speakers, we feel that we have to continuously talk and talk and talk. And when there's a silence, as a speaker, you might feel there shouldn't be. It's embarrassed, so maybe there shouldn't be silence. But for the audience and for students and for any kind of audience, they appreciate that silence, because during that silence is when the audience can absorb what has been said and think. And I think this is somewhat a skill to be learned by presenters, by lecturers and teachers, that silence.
To give silence, to observe?
Exactly. To give some silence, like after saying some important fact, for instance, it's important to just stop and allow the students to observe and contemplate on what is being said. So,
do you have any comments or opinions on interaction or anything about teaching? If you have something left to say.
Well, I guess the main things that I like to emphasize is that first of all, I mentioned autonomy, that it's important that students
autonomy.
have some degree of autonomy and choice on their way of learning and how they want to do it. And also, the teacher's main role should be facilitating learning rather than just presenting facts. So that's one issue. And I think this will help both teachers and students be more effective. So the whole idea is to have a healthy environment for teachers and students. And a healthy and happy environment involves happy students and happy teachers. If any of them are affected, then the other will also be affected. And so it's this connection involves it's very reciprocal. So an unhappy teacher results in unhappy students, and a happy teacher is more likely to make their students also happy. So this balance is very important.
Oh, I see.
My main aim is inspiring students. So my focus is what's the best way to inspire.
And have you got any answer for that question?
Well, it's
difficult?
very tricky. It's
Yes.
very tricky. So what I tend to do is I try to be as interested in what I'm presenting, and I use a lot of graphics, as I mentioned, and animation, for instance, and also the tone of voice is important. It's how
Your tone of voice?
my tone of voice, yes. Like if it's very monotone, students just feel sleepy, you know.
Yes.
Whereas if I change my tone of voice, that will help to keep students awake. And inspiring is, again, it's a skill which can't be learned overnight. So
It takes time.
it takes a lot of time. And I guess that is the main challenge, how to
I see.
inspire.